A sitting attorney general under fire, a congressman refusing to back down, and a hearing that quickly turned into one of the most intense showdowns in recent memory. What started as a routine oversight session suddenly shifted into something far more explosive. Because in just a few minutes, serious accusations were thrown, documents were revealed, and a deeper question began to take shape. What is really being kept out of public view? From the very first moment Thomas Massie began speaking, a list of names not to release. What did the DOJ do with this email? They released this email in the document production. Literally the worst thing you could do to the survivors, you did. And they're getting phone calls. A lot of these people didn't want to be known. And we know you touched the document because you redacted one name and you redacted the lawyer's name, but you left the survivor's name there. The next document I want to show you in that was in the title, the victims' survivors' names. All right, the title of this one is Child Sex, Trafficking Co-Conspirators, Fully Redacted. And by the way, going to unredact them here. Les Wexner is in this now. Your Assistant Deputy Attorney General said, "Oh, well, he appears hundreds of times in the files, but he doesn't appear in this file until I forced you to release it," where he's listed as a co-conspirator not to tax evasion, but to child sex trafficking, not to prostitution, not to money, child sex trafficking. And then finally, what we have here is the third exhibit that I have is emblematic of the FD 302 release. These are the documents that we need that you're holding on to and over-redacting because they have the names of the men who are implicated. How do we know? Because the survivors gave testimony to the FBI, and it's in there. And what happens when you go to the portal at the DOJ to look at what's behind this redaction? Another redaction. So we can't even see them. And then there's some of these files you've pulled down from the website that we will never see because we can't search the redactions. So, I have several questions for you. Who's responsible? Are you able to track who in your organization made this massive failure and released the victims' names? Are you able to track who it was that obscured Les Wexner's name as a co-conspirator in an FBI document? Do you have that kind of accountability? I believe Wexner's name was listed more than 4,000 times, about I had. Yeah, I already told you that. This is where he's listed as a finish my answer. Come on, let me finish my answer. We corrected that within 40 minutes. He was already. You're acting like everybody's trying to cover up Wexner's name. Reclaiming my time. I'm going to answer this question. Reclaiming my time. He was Mr. Chairman. This is how this works. Can I have my time? He was Mr. Chairman. The gentle lady can give her answer. The time belongs to the gentleman from, all right, I'm reclaiming my time, can. I give my answer. I'm going to put the language of the bill up on the screen. Chairman, we have another question on that. A political joke, and I need to give my answer on that. We'll let the Attorney General respond, and then the gentleman can move to his next question. It's my time. Within 40 minutes, you asked me a question. Within 40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back. Within 40 minutes of me catching you red-handed. Red hand. Laughter. There was one redaction where he's listed as A, and we invited you in. This guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to get, you're a failed politician. You need to watch the chairman. Please restore his time and remind the witness of the... There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. Is that your position as well? My position is any victim who comes forward, of course. We would love to hear from them. 1-8. Call FBI. Did you ask Merrick Garland that the last 4 years? Did you talk about Epstein? I am reclaiming my time. I'm glad you're asking about Mary Garland. This is bigger than Watergate when I don't answer a question. This goes over 4 administrations. You don't have to go back to Biden. Let's go back to Obama. Let's go back to George Bush. This cover-up spans decades, and you are responsible for this portion of it. And that's the I want to know. At what point? At what point did the FBI and the DOJ decide that Lex Wexner was not a co-conspirator because our Epstein Files Transparency Act requires you please put it back on the screen? He's to release the internal decision about whether to prosecute him or not. And it's not in the files, and it's not in the files for any of these other men. I'm of the gentleman has, may she answer. And he's a hypocrite because he voted against the ban that we were talking about on deepfake AI porn. Only 2 people voted against it, and you were one of them, hypocrite. The gentleman's time has expired. She didn't answer the question. Mr. Chairman, could she answer the question? Chairman, I was wondering. The gentle lady's allowed. The Attorney General is allowed to respond the way she wants to respond to any member's questions. Republican, Democrat. All right? Clears throat. I have unanimous consent request. Gentleman's recognized for a UC. All right. This is an example. I'm submitting these 3 O2 forms that are entirely redacted even when you go to look at them. Without objection, I'm submitting a witness statement that implicates Les Wexner. Without objection. I'm submitting an article from the New York Times. The DOJ released nude photos and identifiable pictures of the victims. I'm submitting a letter from AG Bondi to Kash Patel, imploring him to quit keeping the files when you found out that they were keeping files from you, because they're still redacting files that you German are. It was clear this wasn't going to follow the usual script. He didn't ease into the topic. He didn't soften his tone. Instead, he went straight to the point, holding up documents and calling out what he described as a massive failure by the Department of Justice. Behind him sat survivors, people directly affected by the Epstein case, watching closely as their stories and their privacy became part of a public confrontation that alone added a layer of tension you couldn't ignore. He introduced 3 documents, not casually, but with purpose. Each one, he argued, represented something deeply wrong with how the DOJ had handled sensitive information. And the way he framed it made it clear this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about trust. It was about whether the system designed to protect people had done the exact opposite. The first document he described immediately grabbed attention. According to Massie, it was an email sent by victims' lawyers to the DOJ. Inside that email was a list of names that were explicitly not supposed to be released. These were individuals who, for very real reasons, wanted to remain anonymous. Their privacy wasn't just a preference, it was protection. But what he claimed happened next was what shocked the room, that he said the DOJ released that very email. Just like that, the information that was meant to stay hidden was suddenly exposed, and the consequences, according to him, were immediate. Survivors began receiving calls. Their identities were no longer shielded, and what made it even more unsettling was the detail he emphasized next. While the DOJ had redacted one name and even removed the lawyer's identity, they left the survivor's name visible. That contrast hit hard because it raised a simple but uncomfortable question. How does something like that happen in a system built to protect victims? But that wasn't the end of it. Massie moved to the second document, and this is where the tone of the hearing shifted even further. He described a file labeled in a way that suggested it contained information about co-conspirators. But when it was released, it was almost entirely redacted. Lines blacked out, names hidden, details missing. On its own, that might not be surprising. Redactions happen all the time in sensitive cases. But Massie wasn't just pointing out that the document was redacted. He was questioning what was behind those redactions. He claimed that when pressure was applied and parts of the document were examined more closely, certain names began to surface. One of those names, he said, was Les Wexner. Now, it's important to note that these claims were made during the hearing and remain part of an ongoing public debate. But in that moment, the implication was clear. Massie was suggesting that key information had been withheld and only revealed when someone pushed hard enough. He didn't stop there. He pointed out that officials had previously said this name appeared many times in the broader files, but according to him, it had not appeared in this specific context until he forced the issue. That's where the tension really started to build, because whether or not his interpretation is accurate, the suggestion alone that information might be selectively revealed was enough to raise eyebrows across the room. And then came the third document. This one focused on FBI forms, documents that typically contain detailed witness statements and investigative notes. But instead of clarity, Massie described something else entirely. He said, "These forms were so heavily redacted that they were almost impossible to interpret. Entire sections were blacked out. Names were missing, and when you tried to dig deeper," he claimed, "you were met with even more redactions." It wasn't just that information was hidden. It felt, at least in his words, like it was being layered over and over again. Critics of the DOJ argue that this level of redaction raises serious concerns about transparency. Supporters, on the other hand, say these measures are necessary to protect sensitive information and ongoing investigations. But in that moment, Massie framed it as something else entirely, an effort that made it nearly impossible for the public to see the full picture. And that's when the exchange with Pam Bondi took a sharp turn. Bondi attempted to respond, but the conversation quickly became chaotic. Interruptions started piling up. Voices rose. The phrase "reclaiming my time" echoed repeatedly as both sides tried to take control of the moment. It was no longer a calm exchange of questions and answers. It had turned into a confrontation at one point. Bondi pushed back on Massie's claims, saying that the issue he was highlighting had already been corrected quickly. According to her, within about 40 minutes, the situation had been addressed. But Massie immediately countered that claim. He argued that the correction only happened because he pointed it out, that without his intervention it might not have been fixed at all. That back and forth intensified quickly. Massie accused her of being caught red-handed. Bondi pushed back, suggesting that the accusations were exaggerated and politically motivated. Then the moment escalated even further. She dismissed his argument by suggesting he was driven by what she called Trump derangement syndrome. That line changed the tone instantly, because now it wasn't just about documents or redactions. It had become personal. The chairman had to step in trying to restore order. But by then, the moment had already crossed into something much bigger than a typical hearing exchange. It had become a viral-style confrontation, the kind that spreads far beyond the room it happens in. But beneath all the noise, something more significant was being said. Massie shifted his focus to a broader claim. He suggested that what they were seeing wasn't just a one-time issue. It wasn't just about one email or one set of documents. Instead, he framed it as part of a much larger pattern, something that, in his view, had been happening for years, even decades. He pointed out that this issue didn't start with one administration. He referenced multiple presidents, Democrat and Republican alike, suggesting that this problem crossed political lines. That framing was important because it removed the argument from simple partisan conflict and placed it into something much deeper. If his claim were true, it wouldn't just be a political issue, it would be systemic. He even compared it to one of the most well-known scandals in U.S. history, suggesting this situation could be bigger than Watergate. Now, that's a bold comparison, and many would argue it's an exaggeration. But in terms of impact, it did exactly what it was meant to do. It made people stop and pay attention. And then he asked what might have been the most important question of the entire exchange. At what point? He asked, did the DOJ decide not to pursue certain individuals? Not in general terms, not hypothetically. Specifically, he pointed out that the law required the DOJ to release internal decisions explaining why certain people were not prosecuted. And according to him, those decisions were missing, not just for one individual, but for others as well. That absence, he argued, was a major issue, because without those explanations, there's no way to fully understand how decisions were made, no way to see whether everything was handled fairly, no way to know what was considered and what might have been ignored. Bondi attempted to respond again, but time was running out. The structure of the hearing didn't allow for long, detailed answers. And just like that, the moment passed. The question lingered in the air unanswered, but the hearing wasn't done yet. Before everything could move on, Massie submitted additional materials into the official record. FBI forms, witness statements, news reports, letters between officials, each one adding another layer to the situation. Some reports claimed that sensitive materials had been released improperly. Others pointed to disagreements within the DOJ itself. There were even mentions of multiple individuals stepping down in connection with how these files were handled. Now, it's important to approach these claims carefully. Not all of them are confirmed. Some are based on reports or interpretations, but together they created a sense that there was more beneath the surface, details that hadn't been fully explained yet. And just when it seemed like the hearing might go even deeper, everything stopped. The session was paused for votes, just like that, and no resolution. No final answers, just a sudden break in the middle of something that felt unfinished. The energy in the room shifted again, but this time it wasn't tension. It was uncertainty. Because when you step back and look at what happened, it's not just about the confrontation between Massie and Bondi. It's about the questions that remain, the missing pieces, the redactions, the claims and counterclaims. Some people see this as evidence that something is being hidden. Others believe it's a complex situation being oversimplified in a heated political environment. Both sides have arguments. Both sides have supporters. But here's the part that keeps people watching. If everything has already been revealed, if there's nothing left to uncover, then why does it still feel like something is missing? Maybe it's the redacted lines. Maybe it's the unanswered questions. Or maybe it's the way the conversation itself unfolded, fast, chaotic, and incomplete. Because sometimes it's not just what's said that matters. It's what never gets answered.